Hi, welcome to the channel Coders Arc, where we unravel the world of coding and architecture together. The topic of today's conversation is simplest Lambda tutorial, step-by-step S3 triggered Lambda. Before we dive into the code, let's look at the steps. Install AWS Toolkit for Visual Studio. Connect your AWS account to Visual Studio using the IAM Identity Center or secret and access keys. In my case, I'll be using the access keys. Create a Lambda function from out-of-the-box S3 template. Publish code to AWS Lambda. Assign appropriate IAM privileges for Lambda functions, which include S3 access, CloudWatch access, Lambda access. Upload the CSV file, and finally, see the contents in the CloudWatch logs. So let's dive right into it. I am right now on the Visual Studio 2022 homepage. From here, I will select Create a new project. As you can see, there are many templates over here that AWS Toolkit provides out of the box. From here, I will select the AWS Lambda project.NET Core C#. Let's name this project. Now you can select from one of the available AWS blueprints. As you can see, there are many triggers: DynamoDB, Kinesis, S3, SNS, SQS. For the purpose of this demo, we'll use the S3 function. And finally, it creates a solution for us. So let's look into the file. The file is function.cs, and here there is an object for the S3 client, which we will use to access the contents of S3 file. And it will also have a very important function, which is called the function handler. The function handler is the entry method for every single Lambda invocation, whether your source trigger is S3, DynamoDB, SQS, SNS, it does not matter. This is the primary function that's always called. In this case, the method takes in an S3 event object and will respond to any S3 notifications. Let's replace the code from this function with some meaningful code. Okay, I have replaced this section with some meaningful code. Let's walk through it. We still have event as the S3 event. We will extract the bucket name and the object key from the event. And then we will parse the contents of the file through the stream one by one, line by line, and show the contents. If there is an exception, we handle the exception. Next step now is we publish this to the AWS Lambda. If you remember, we had installed the AWS Toolkit. Uh, that integrates with Visual Studio to provide this option called Publish to AWS Lambda. Click on that. You can see the AWS credentials profile. I will choose the default profile that I have. You should also have an AWS account and provide access to that profile before you get to this step. Choose the function name. I will say coders arc S3 Lambda demo 1. And I will choose the function handler name correctly. So usually whenever you're running this, let's say you've run this program a couple of times, it always remembers the handler name of the old. So you got to make sure that you're providing the correct namespace. In my case, it's the coders arc Lambda S3 trigger. That's the name of the assembly. And I will also choose the name of the actual namespace, coders arc Lambda S3. This is extremely important that you choose the right names. Otherwise, your code can have functions at the runtime. And another important thing is the name of the function handler. You can choose any name you want, but this is the entry method name that AWS provides by default. But make sure the name that you choose in the code is the same as the name you choose over here. Hit next. It'll show you some of the roles that are already used in your previous execution. You click on this dropdown and you can see all the roles that AWS provides out of the box. We will choose the AWS Lambda full access, AWS managed policy. What that means is that the Lambda will execute with this permission attached to it, to the role. Upload. And now you can see behind the scenes, the AWS Toolkit from Visual Studio zips up the code and pushes it to the AWS cloud along with the appropriate IAM role so that when this Lambda function executes, it takes the IAM full Lambda access permission. At this point, the Lambda function has been successfully deployed on AWS. So let's take a look at it. I'm on the AWS homepage. From here, I can click on Lambda. You can see that the function is deployed successfully. Usually this takes a matter of only a few seconds. Let's look into it. From here, you can see that AWS provides a lot of options for code, test, monitor, configuration, aliases, versions. We don't need to look into it right now. What we need to do is create a connection between the S3 and the Lambda function that we just deployed. Before we can create that connection, let's create a bucket. I go to another tab and hit create bucket. Give it whatever name you want. Make sure this bucket is in the same region as your Lambda function. I will leave all the default options and click create bucket. Now let's click into this bucket and see that there are no objects allocated in this bucket. So we have not really uploaded any files in this bucket just yet. So let's go back to the Lambda, click add trigger, select a source. Here, these are the sources that will trigger AWS whenever an event happens on these services. For the purpose of this demo, we will select S3. But as you can see, there are other options like SNS, SQS, DynamoDB, Kinesis. There are many options in the serverless world. So now let's select the bucket. We'll select the bucket we created. Event type, we will leave all object create events. What that means is any action that happens on any record in that bucket will trigger this Lambda. Usually in a production scenario, you would not want to do that. In a production scenario, you would want to granularly give this access. But for now, I will leave the default options. Click add. Before you click add, acknowledge. And you can see that the trigger is now created. So now let's get into the section of giving this Lambda appropriate IAM roles before we upload the file to S3. So for that, we will open IAM, click roles in another tab. Here you will see a bunch of roles that already exist. If you remember when we were creating this Lambda, this is the name for that role that was created. Let's look into the permissions for this role. There is right now only the Lambda full access permission, but we need to give it the S3 and the CloudWatch access. Let's select S3 full access. Usually in a production scenario, you will not give the S3 full access because you want to restrict the Lambda to only the buckets that it has access to and also only the subfolders within the bucket that it has access to. But for the purpose of this demo, let's give it full access and also give CloudWatch permission. Why we need CloudWatch permission is so that you can look at the runtime logs for the execution of the Lambda. All right, so we've given this role all these three different permissions. So we are now good to go. Okay, so now we will test our Lambda. So let's upload a CSV file into this bucket. I'm in my bucket, click the upload. I will add the file. It's a simple text CSV file. Click upload and the file is uploaded. So now let's look at the Lambda function. So one of the things is there is a tab called monitor. In the monitor, you can see a bunch of CloudWatch metrics. You can see the metrics, logs, traces. We will cover these in the future sections. But what's important is there are 4 buttons over here. Let's click the view CloudWatch logs. Here you will see the latest log for execution. Let's click on that and let's see if our logs are present here. So you can see this is the file we uploaded. It said it successfully processed the S3 file, and here is the content. And this is just the content of the file. So in this video, we were able to see how to upload a file on S3 and how to trigger a Lambda function from it. I hope you were able to gain some good value out of this video. In future videos, we will cover how Lambda can be triggered from various other sources like SQS, SNS, Event Bridge, API Gateway, Kinesis Streams, and other Lambda serverless sources. Goodbye for now. Thank you.